Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and welcome to the Peasant and Indigenous Press Forum. My name is Diljit Korsoni, and I'm a workers' rights attorney working with the growing culture on food systems transformation. The purpose of this press forum is to connect you, members of the press, journalists, digital storytellers, directly to the communities who are at the forefront of issues involving food and land. These forums are an ongoing partnership between journalists, grassroots groups, peasant farmers, and indigenous communities. Even as these very communities feed the majority of the Earth's population, protect 80% of the world's biodiversity, and bear the brunt of climate change and food systems issues, their stories go unheard. This forum was created to bridge that gap so that these communities can have direct relationship and contact and access to media publications to work towards getting their struggles and solutions covered in storytelling. These communities face immense barriers, including some today who are facing threats to their lives as their communities continue to face ongoing violence and danger. Today, we are honored to have each of these speakers here with us. So as they take the time to show up and share their stories with you face to face, we invite you to turn your video on and engage in this mutual exchange. If you have any technical issues, please feel free to reach out to our team by using the chat box feature. The chat box also contains important ground rules that you should be aware of, as well as a media advisory. We are also providing interpretation in Spanish and English. To select your preferred language, please click on the globe icon, which will be on the bottom of your screen, and you can pick either Spanish or English. For each speaker, we will have 12 minutes, starting with a moderated 8-minute Q&A interview style between me and the community representative. And that'll be followed up by 4 minutes where you can raise your questions. So please use the raise hands feature at the bottom of your screen again if you have a question. And we will call on people in the order of the hands that are raised. But please remember to keep your mic on mute until we get to that Q&A portion. Media contacts will also be shared in the press releases as the speakers come on the screen. We ask that you please avoid posting or sharing any of the information that you hear today or sharing the identities of these courageous leaders. As we said, many of them are facing death threats. Each of these speakers will detail the real-life impacts of climate change, as well as the community-led responses that are designed to preserve their roles as stewards of the land. We will begin today by first meeting Tumal or Togabilde from northern Kenya. Tumal is an 8th-generation livestock keeper, a representative of the Gabra community, and one of the 400,000 residents of Marsabit County, the majority of whom depend on pastoralism and livestock for their livelihood. We'll be speaking to Tumal about the impacts of climate change on pastoralism, migration, and conflict. What is happening in his community is reflective of the 20 million pastoralists in the Horn of Africa, as well as over 200 million pastoralists worldwide. Tumal is an outspoken advocate for pastoralists, and I'd like to officially welcome him into this session. Welcome, Tumal. You may unmute yourself. Tumal, you describe a way of relating to the cycles of nature that existed before the onset of human-driven climate change. This way of living is in direct relationship with the environment, seeing nature as kin. What does pastoralism mean to you and your community?
Okay, in its very simple term, pastoralism is 3 stones, is 3 fire stones. The man is animals and the rangelands.
In that sense, with this trifecta that you're talking about, how does that relate to nature? How does that involve protecting the environment?
Man, if I start with the man has got the he has a culture to protect the nature. That because this man has got a culture, has got an institutions, where from the childhood they are being taught don't cut trees because where you cut trees, there will be no rain. That's what we are told even when we are kids. Then there is animals, the livestock is also trying to venture, trying to grass in an area where no crop farming is done in the bush. And also the hoofs of these animals, the defecations of these animals also helps the environment, helps the rangeland grazing area. So the man has got the role to play, the herder, the livestock has got the role to play, and then the nature, the natural rangeland nature, and these animals also control the invasive plants because they grazes in the middle of nowhere where there's no growing crops or other some forms of productions, and they are best used to that.
That is so helpful. And for those who are listening, you can look into the chat for the press release to hear more, to see more about what Tumal is talking about. Tumal, we have an earlier quote from you where you say climate change is like your brother. It used to be cyclic and it is changing these days. How have these disruptions to the cycles and extreme weather impacted your livestock, your life as a pastoralist in Marsabit County?
Good. In shortest possible answer, it used to be cyclic. It comes after 16 years, 8 years, but these days is after every month and it's happened. So in the past, we used to, our grandparents and our parents used to copy very well. But now, as the dynamics changes, we also keep on adjusting to it. But the impact, it has now overruled the resilience adaptive capacity of the pastoralists in Marsabit County and in Kenya and in the horns of Africa. The impact is loss of livelihood at the household level, loss of livestock populations. Population of the livestock goes down because mechanism has been tampered with. The preparedness has been broken up. The web has been broken up. So what do we mean by that is that, so you get a loss. It's a total economical loss, which pulls you down your cultural identity at your community level. And as a result of that, other emerging things coming up. The person who lost his animals will just go to the town seeking for relief foods. Sometimes it's not there. So the nutrient level, the nutrition level for the expectant mothers, adults, and the children, all these are impacted.
So there's a huge impact on the health of the community.
Yes.
This impact on
conflicts also emerged, and also diseases to the livestock, because diseases coming up, conflict is coming up. Then the community is also, who used to be having plenty of livestock, is now stressed, and some even go shop breaking of the urban-based business community.
So what I'm hearing from you is that without that livelihood, without the livestock, there is no livelihood. We also learned that earlier this year, on January 17th, there were flash floods in your region. How did that impact you personally, your own livestock?
Yes, that one impacted me seriously, if I may quote my figures, because on that particular date, I lost 245 goats and sheep, valued $9,800 and these animals have been incurring, because I've been doing the resilience, adaptive capacity, cost of water tracking, workmen wages, drugs, and all these things. When you factor in, it comes to $13,500. That's how I was impacted, because I've done in a very articulate way that one baby goat or one lamb or one camel calf, when it is born, the effective cost of all this is $1.25. So my figures are real and factored on that. So now my livestock population is reduced, my daily living is affected, and I'm socially distressed again.
Well, you represent an organization called the Northern Climate Resilience Initiative. What are the types of local solutions that you want to see used? And has the government or any other entities supported you in trying to push those local solutions forward?
Northern Climate Resilience Initiatives, I registered with the government of Kenya in order to be, I've never been funded, but it is a platform that I talk to people, including my members, and in the initial starting of this CBO is early warning, giving the livestock keepers early warning, early response, information sharing. That is the purpose. But you asked me a very good question, that the NGOs, the governments, they are trying, but their approach is urban-based. People sit in Nairobi, city of Nairobi, and trying to talk on behalf of the farmers who are 1,200 kilometers away. My livestock camp is 1,200 kilometers from the city of Nairobi. So it is an urban-based, it's a roadside information. Yes, they are trying. Also, there's what we call CLIP. Kenya Livestock CLIP is Kenya Livestock Index-based insurance. Even that one is not adding up. They're using what we call tropical livestock units, which is very minimal. A whole camel, which goes for 60,000, 70,000, they pay 2,500 or something like that. And even this information doesn't go into the grassroots communities. Yes, they are pretending, but and then also when they come to a town, there's also what we call professional workshop goers. This information will never reach the giant livestock keepers who lives so many kilometers away.
Thank you so much, Tumal. We have time for one final question. We see that you're people that are already living the effects of climate change. And we have read questions that you've been posed by other interviews where they say, why don't you just sell all the animals and do some other business? What is your response to that? Why is it important to preserve the pastoralist lifestyle?
That is a very good thing, because even my colleagues who have gone to school, they say, why are you wasting your time? But livestock is my cultural identity at my individual level. It's my economical, it's a shortcut to money. Again, livestock is a physical investment. Mm-hmm. Money is like a flower. Today in US, you can have $200 in the evening. You have gone to supermarket and so forth, drinking and so forth is gone. But one camel, one female, they're always there. So it's a physical investment. Yeah.
You feel like you finished your thought, Tumal, before we get into questions from the journalists?
Yes, please. Yeah. Just a way. There's
For those of you in the audience, if you have any questions, you can start to prepare them and use the raise the hands feature to place your questions.
Okay. Oh, you want me to ask a question? Okay. I want to add something. Yeah, selling fast business. My another very important thing is we used to have the pastoralist. We have who are nomadics in life, in mobility. Right. Now, from my dad days, now I'm turning into a commercial livestock keeper, where I don't think keeping animals just for prestige. Yes, for cultural identity, but I'm a commercial livestock businessman, a livestock trader. In other words, this livestock, you can also use it as an alternative income. Education of your children, building rental houses in urban centers, yearly disposing of your animals. And also, I ask myself, what's the cost of keeping camels, goats, and sheep? So you must also have an economy of scales. For you to keep to keep afloat going, you have to keep goats and sheep not numbering less than 200, and all of them has to be females. And for camels, the lactating camels should be 25 and plus. So selling will not be possible because it's a cultural identity combined with commercial. It supports my livelihood, and I'm a commercial livestock keeper, and it's an alternative diversification, because from the produce, this one, you educate your girls, you educate your boys, and alternatives. When it fails on the side of the camels, you go to the sheep or to the cows. Like now, it is my rental, small money that I'm getting from rental. It is the one which is doing the resilience of water tracking, the drugs, the workmen wages. Then as soon as if these animals will have survived, I sell and return. It's like getting the debt recovery from the animals again. What I've invested in the animals, I will recover.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Tumal, for the detail. You're such a you have so much knowledge and so much wisdom, and it's very clear that peasant-led solutions like yours need to be amplified. We do have questions coming in from the journalists that we'd like to start to select. People in the audience, please know that Tumal has traveled a great distance to be here with us today. So we encourage you to not be shy and place your questions by raising your hand.
Okay. Or I can ask a question now.
We are waiting for the audience, the journalists and the digital storytellers to raise their questions, and then we'll start picking them. They're going to use a hand, they're going to raise their hand on the actual Zoom. There's a button there for that.
Hi, Tumal. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us today. I just wanted to ask you, what type of support would you be looking for from your government in terms of preserving pastoralist lifestyles?
Come again, slowly, come again.
Sorry about that. What would you recommend for your government to support pastoralist lifestyles?
Okay, my recommendation is, one, there must be good policies in place, policies to support this, because if there are policies for camel policy, goats policy, and all this for the marketing, meat production, and all this, and milking system, that policy is like an open up a system that you can apply. Secondly, we are encouraging a lot of, and this has to be a worldwide things. All the pastoralists in the world, they prepare themselves, they are the resilient, but uncertain loss and damages, who's going to pay? That is our, who's going to pay? And yet, the county which I come from, 90% is a livestock-based economy. They take our money, but they don't return.
That's a great question. I think we can move on to the next question, and that is by Dan Saladino. You can unmute yourself now.
I think can you hear me now? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thanks very much for sparing the time and traveling to share this with us. Can you just describe a little more about the conflict as well, the nature of the conflict and the impact on pastoralists?
Yes, we used to have, as the climate change is also is in dynamics. Conflict is these days in dynamics. We used to have communal conflicts that is raised, that's caused by water past or resource-based conflict, but the dynamic is shifting from there. It is now a kind of politically instigated by the learned people. People are vying for parliamentary seats, county assemblies, and the big offices. Then they are making use of, they are spoiling the innocent farmers or livestock keepers or crop farmers incite against each other. These people used to live harmony. So in summary, we have a conflict based or planted from the town. And it's again a commercial one these days, because someone in town somewhere can tell the neighboring pastoral communities to raid each other, and then the animals which are brought from there, they are being sold somewhere in Nairobi in big cities. Unfortunately, also, some politicians uses this as a leverage, so that, oh, my community has killed so and so, so that next time you vote for me. So the traditional solving the problems, sharing of the common resources through the elders, customer institutions, it has weakened by the urban populations. People are learned who have gone to school.
Is climate change, Tumal, we have another follow-up question. Is climate change causing resource scarcity, and is that related to these conflicts as well? Is there a relationship there?
Yes, it really contributes. In the first place, climate change is there. Okay, already in a community, there is a poverty. And then the climate change is also contributing to the poverty. Then the worst one is the conflict, because just like the other day, I think I shared just about a few days ago, about 1,800 cows were driven by another community from the Gabra community across the Kenya-Ethiopia border. So we are already in the crisis of the climate change, but that is coming again, bulldozing and finishing you. So it's a big contributor.
Thank you so much, Tumal, for this detail. For those in the audience, you can reach Tumal directly by the press release, but we will need to move on to the next segment. Thank you so much, Tumal, for making time. We know that you traveled a great distance to be here, and we immensely appreciate you.
Yes, thank you.
So now we will move on to the next segment. This will be covering issues involving the Democratic Republic of Congo. Peasant and indigenous groups there are facing many different challenges as they seek to lead locally led food systems while protecting their lands. Threats to their communities, to their lives, unstable internet access are all barriers to their storytelling capacity. This means that having access to publications and journalists is extremely challenging. And although we were set to have Nathaniel Buka Mupungu, leader of the Confédération Paysanne du Congo, also known as COPACO, speak today, ultimately he wasn't able to attend, but we will continue trying to establish contact by video. Nonetheless, it's important for you to know that the peasant groups of the DRC are actively resisting attacks on their forests and their communities. First off, as stated in your toolkit, foreign companies have illegally converted logging petitions and logging sites into conservation concessions for the sale of carbon credits in the global market. And these transfers are done without any consultation with those that have been in right relationship with these lands for thousands of years. Peasant and indigenous-led groups contest this illegal transfer as the original stewards of the world's second largest rainforest. These forests are world-renowned as a unique carbon sink that is critical in the global fight against climate change. The trees in these forests store more carbon per hectare than the Amazon rainforest. So the stakes are high, not just for the stewards of the forest, but for all humankind. And we know that there are several REDD+ projects being run in the Congo by the UN as a scheme to reduce carbon emissions. But in reality, these are private concessions that encroach on protected areas in a bid to extract from an unpeopled wilderness. Peasant-led organizations like COPACO have documented more than 150 human rights violations against indigenous peoples within these areas, mostly concentrated in the northern and western regions of the country. Finally, we want to highlight a recent report by Minority Rights Groups International based on more than 550 eyewitness accounts, linking foreign entities such as the Wildlife Conservation Society, USAID, and German developmental agencies to the training of paramilitary officers who engaged in atrocious human rights violations. The Botswana people are an indigenous group who have been resisting the construction of the Kahuzi-Biega National Park since 1975. This is also known as the Gorilla Park. Over the last 3 years, however, there's been a sharp uptick in brutal evictions, mass killings, and gang rapes. These incidents all expose the true nature of conservation in the DRC. Please stay tuned as we will share more about stories and solutions on this topic. You will also find more information in the chat box relating to this. Now, we will transition to what it looks like when communities lead conservation, regeneration of the land, and also tackle issues of climate change, food justice, and food sovereignty. It is well known that the settler colonial strategy of the United States was to destroy traditional foodways, to cement a dependence on the Western diet. The extermination of a keystone species, the buffalo, was purposefully designed to inflict systemic physical and spiritual violence. The legacy of the loss of food systems and culture is still being experienced today in the form of widespread health issues and lack of access to healthy food. However, today, the Sicangu Lakota are working to reclaim, restore land and culture. And this is done through their 7-generation framework, which is based on indigenous spirituality. This work includes the return of the buffalo, in which the Sicangu Lakota tend to the largest indigenous managed buffalo herd in the world. To hear more, let us please welcome Matthew Wilson, the Food Sovereignty Director with the Sicangu Community Development Corporation. Welcome, Matthew.
Hello.
Thank you for coming today. I'm going to jump right in. So when it comes to food security, most programs that we see kind of pigeonhole communities into, beneficiaries of aid, kind of devoid of any agency. How is your work different on food sovereignty? Can you please share with the audience how your work is building a more holistic approach to food sovereignty?
Yes, so some of the things that we see on Rosebud is that in terms of food security, it's like a one-time food donation. And usually it's a lot of times it's food that's, about to expire or has expired. And so for us, that is very helpful in terms of meeting our basic needs currently at the moment. But for us with food sovereignty, we're trying to focus on how to get past that, and so that we can start changing these systems, that we can start feeding ourselves. With that, with our 7-gen plan, we're really looking in terms of incorporating our culture with our relationship with the land. Some of the things that we are embracing is systems changes and systems thinking. And that concept is really ingrained in our culture. We call that wodakuye. So it's like kinship and making connections, and not only with people, but with the land and like I said, systems. And so we are looking at our food system and how it is connected with health, with our housing, with our language, with our culture, and with our relationship with the land. And so we are trying to take farming and agriculture, something that traditionally hasn't really been a part of our culture, and making it a part of our culture now. And with that, one of our biggest changes is how we traditionally and currently view our relationship with the land, incorporating regenerative agriculture with that. And so that's some of the biggest changes we are trying to make here on Rosebud, whereas the rest of the US really is using conventional agriculture practices, using a lot of fertilizers and pesticides. And so for us, we're really trying to mimic nature as much as possible in order to build the soil health, reduce our carbon emissions, sequester some of the carbon that's in the air. So a lot of that is really starting off with the community level. So we do a lot of community work in terms of teaching people how to harvest their own food, whether that's traditional foods or conventional like garden foods. And another thing we do is teaching people how to grow their own food. So we have a farm apprenticeship program really aimed at teaching people how to do small scale farming and using regenerative practices. And then, like you said, our regenerative buffalo project, Wolakota, that is, like you said, it bringing a keystone species back to our plains. And buffalo itself, has such a big connection with our people and our community. Not only is it, traditional food source, and really big part of our economy, providing, food, housing, clothing. but there's just so much there that I can't really get into right now. But with our origin story and our connection with buffalo, we are the same people. And so it's really amazing to have, that to have buffalo back on our homelands and to be able to have that food source a part of our diet again. And buffalo also, we look to them to learn how to be, I guess, regenerative agriculture and do some of that practices. Whereas you see cattle here on Rosebud really overgrazing fields, and buffalo really kind of go and migrate, and depending on the area, they don't overgraze. And so that's something that we've learned traditionally as Lakotas, as that we were migrating people. And so we weren't staying in one area too long. We were always kind of migrating in different parts of the plains. And so I think a lot of that is just really getting back to our culture and really incorporating that in how it looks in a modern sense.
That is so beautiful. I'm so excited to be able to share and amplify your story, especially because the idea or the concept, the framework, the outlook, the approach of 7 generations, it just doesn't come up in discussions about climate change or even food systems reform. A lot of the dialogue is about scaling up, the calling for action.
Hay ejemplos de acción urgente.
That background, that as the overarching principle of this 7 generations framework.
Yeah, so 7 Gen isn't something that we as Lakota have developed. It's something that a lot of indigenous cultures across North America and across the world have really embraced. It's really going back to the idea that in 7 generations, our culture will be stronger than it was currently. So it goes back to the revitalization of culture, revitalization of the land, and our connection with it. And so it's really important for us to be able to live into our culture and our values, and share that with the rest of the world. A lot of times we see the disconnect with people in the land, and it's so hurtful for us to see us having to protest for our basic human rights to get access to water. Looking with the history with the pipeline protests, we're still doing it to this day. A lot of communities are protesting for pipelines, and so a lot of it is really just making sure that we preserve our environment and have a safe future for the next 7 generations. And that's really what it goes to, making sure that the decisions we make today and how it affects 7 generations down the road.
Oh, wow. I really appreciate that. I wonder how you would apply that framework to outside of the food system, outside beyond the soil. How does that framework then apply to school systems and access to good quality healthcare?
Yeah, a lot of it is just really getting back to, like I said, wodake, which is the relationships and the kinship. I think even for us, whenever we work with partners and funding, just at the organizational level, it's really just making sure that we connect with the people who share the same values. And we don't want like a one-time donation, which is great, but we want a relationship being built. So the same thing with education. We want to incorporate, indigenous education with, the modern education system. And same thing with food. We know that there is a traditional indigenous food knowledge that we have and that we're revitalizing, but also we recognize that there is a current food system that we need to merge. Just personally for myself, with my own food journey, I've been really trying to understand like what is a modern Lakota food system, or what are even modern Lakota foods. And so I think just that is really being able to be open and flexible and not feeling bad about incorporating your own culture with the modern context, especially the context of colonization that a lot of people, indigenous communities, have been forced to assimilate to.
Wow. I feel like we could just have a whole nother session just on the diet. I mean, we know that the Lakota diet was, before colonization, was super rich in superfoods, modern superfoods. But moving on, you mentioned the Buffalo Range, and that's 28,000 acres. That's the largest ever What is your long-term vision for this range and for the buffalo? And what would this look like 7 generations from now in an ideal world?
I think for us in the next couple of years, we're hoping to really grow out our herd, and really be able to have buffalo be a food source once again. But even beyond just it being food, having that connection again. There's so many ceremonies and stories and songs related to the buffalo that we haven't really been able to pass down. It's there, but we haven't been able to share it. And so being able to have buffalo there again, and also buffalo, like I said, are kind of our teachers in terms of how to be good relatives, being able to care for, the land and everything. So a lot of that is going to be, we would love to see like some kind of like conservation site down there with us, and being able to invite community members to come to the range and be able to go on plant walks and see how buffalo have changed the landscape in terms of, not overgrazing, but making sure that the buffalo grasslands are going to be intact. And some of the things that we have to see with the community is that there's like a picture of like the soil, and then the modern grasses, the roots only go down so much, then like the buffalo grass goes down like a couple of feet. So it's just a lot of regenerative practices that we're hoping to incorporate across the board.
It's an exciting time. So I think that we've reached the point where we can solicit some questions from the audience. Feel free to please use the raise hands feature, and we will call on you in the order that you show up. Can you talk a little bit more about, I'm sorry. We have a question from Lucas Posada. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much for sharing your story. My question, I'm from Colombia, and I'm really interested in like native diets, and especially maybe if you can give us some pointers as to how you guys been decolonizing your diet, as we feel that is something that we must do over here as well. So maybe if you can share something around decolonizing our diet. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. So some of the things we're doing now is really just incorporating indigenous foods in schools, especially. I think it's so important to really have our youth be exposed to those foods at such a young age. So one thing I really haven't talked about, we have a Lakota immersion school that has grades K through 1. And with that, we're able to incorporate buffalo in school lunches and other indigenous foods. And so that's going to be the first step, is really just incorporating that and just getting that exposure. For myself, I didn't really grow up eating buffalo just because it wasn't available to us. It wasn't until I was maybe in like high school where I first kind of had buffalo. And so just being able to have that available, especially in schools, but also with community, being able to teach people how to go out and identify different plants and how to use them in foods and medicine is kind of the number one key. And then just creating more accessible ways to share that knowledge. So a lot of it is we want to do more videos and how to identify those plants and how to use them.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you so much for that response. And Emma, you're up next. You can unmute yourself.
Hi, thanks so much for your time. I'm in the north of Ireland currently, and I had a question about how do you deal with the conflict that comes up when decolonization is brought up in a space partnership with the colonizer? Because I'm working with a charity at the minute, and in the north of Ireland, we are still a colonized state, and I'm having a lot of pushback with bringing in a decolonial message. I'm just wondering, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for us in the state of South Dakota, we definitely hadn't really not a lot of support with the state government in terms of pushing on for indigenous policies, our policies that just support indigenous communities in general. I think just getting those kind of spaces, it's important to really just bring indigenous voices to the forefront, and just amplifying them. I think for the most part, a lot of people are more inclined to share that space, especially now that we have more and more Indigenous representation in the government, at least here in the US. And I think that's really important, not only just for the community, Indigenous communities, to see Indigenous people in these different levels of power. But I think just for myself, just being able to speak upon and share our story and know that I can't speak for every Indigenous community, but I can share, what's happening in my own community, and this is how you can help. And for the most part, that's going to been really receptive with people in those kind of spaces.
Thank you. Did that answer your question?
A bit, but it's a very different, the north of Ireland's a very different landscape. We are no longer Indigenous, but there's a want to bring back the Indigenous culture, but it's so lost that the term colonization doesn't come up. And then when it does come up, it's clouded with white supremacy narratives, and it's a different sort of context. But thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Thank you for the response. Our next question is from Nancy Matsumoto, and she'd like to ask Matthew about the traditional division of labor and gender roles between men and women in your food system.
Yeah, so the traditional roles were that, women were really the ones who took care of the family and, had like the property, and the men were the ones who were traditionally the hunters and the warriors. And so with that, that really isn't the case today. We see a lot more and more women working in, and more men staying at home. We see more men being the ones who go out and being harvesters, whereas like women, that was more of a women's role to go out and harvest and forage. So I think it's definitely being able to understand the traditional side of the gender roles, but also being open and to modernize it. We never had a chance to see what our gender roles and what even our food system, the natural progression of what it would evolve to, because there was such a big dismantling of that. We never got to see the natural progression of it. So I think that's something we're still figuring out to this day. But for the most part, there's still a lot of roles and responsibilities that exist to this day in terms of gender roles. And there's still a lot of like ceremonies in terms of becoming a woman or becoming a man that we are still trying to revitalize and bring back.
It's an ongoing process.
Thank you. That was great.
We have time for one final question before we move on to the final speaker. Okay, the final question is coming in from Rebecca. Rebecca, you may unmute yourself now. Thank you.
Thank you. So Matt, I just wanted to know, with the new bison buffalo range and also going back to the traditional diet of, eating bison, what measures are there in place to ensure that there isn't an over consumption of this meat where it again doesn't become sustainable?
Mm-hmm. Good question. So we have just barely started to do buffalo harvests. So we've done a few in the past year with our school and with some community members. But for the most part, looking at infrastructure, especially, we are needing a meat processing facility. Some of the things we're thinking about in terms of what that looks like for us is making sure that we are harvesting buffalo in a way that's we can still incorporate ceremonies. We definitely aren't going to be over harvesting them, but I think just making sure that we have a community perspective in terms of how that facility is going to be shaped, and how that we can still make sure that we have all the regulations at the federal levels that we can still harvest them in a way that's going to be able to support communities. But for the most part, I think that's something that we would still need to develop. I think just in our stage right now, we're still on the growth stage of just really growing out the herd, but that's going to be something that we need to work with our community and make sure there's community input there.
Thank you, Matt. That was a lot of information. And if you want to get more, you can definitely reach out to him directly. The contact information is in the press release. Thank you so much, Matthew. We really appreciate your time here today.
Plumia, thank you.
So now we will be moving on to our final speaker, Margarita. And today we have been hearing about the impact of climate change. It's costing real lives for the communities to protect their lands. We'd like to take a brief moment to recognize the land defenders in Honduras, like Jose Humberto Carrillo, Feliz Vasquez Lopez, Beta Cáceres, and many more who have lost their lives in this fight all across the world. We will now hear from Margarita Pineda Gonzalez, who lives in Honduras, the most dangerous country for an indigenous land defender. Margarita comes from the Lenca people, who are the largest indigenous group in Honduras, stewards of the ancient forests and rivers that run through the plains and mountains of this region. They continue to resist the exploitation of their territories by foreign-owned hydroelectric dams, hydropower plants, and powerful mining operations. Margarita has been a land defender for 45 years. She was forced to flee from her home at one point, but she returned after the coup d'etat in 2009 to form the Movimiento Independiente Indígena Lenca de la Paz Honduras, MILPAH. Margarita, thank you so much for speaking with us today about the ongoing development projects in your community. Today, we're hearing from groups that show us that they have the knowledge to protect the ecosystems. They have served as stewards of the land, caring for the animals, and yet they are the most impacted by the effects of climate change and extraction. Can you tell the audience a little bit about the human impact from the construction of the La Minosa mine in Santa Barbara, which is owned by Minosa, a subsidiary of a Canadian mining company called Aura Minerals? You can unmute yourself,
Sí.
Margarita.
Gracias. Thank you. Good morning. So those of us who are here in this forum, we know that we are people who are very committed to life. The impact of the Minosa mine is it's a business that's a very extractive one. That's in Santa Barbara. The inhabitants of San Andres de Patanares are people who are the most impacted by this mine. Minosa is a business that's funded by Canadian funding. And the truth is that it's something terrible that's taking place in Honduras. When a mine has been conceded and has been allowed to exhume and to destroy land such as the cemetery in the community. And imagine how destructive it's been to have our ancestors' tombs exhumed and disrupted. And this has resulted in many families who had to literally sell their lands because of this. About 70% of the people who lived in that area have been displaced because of the mining. Their lands have been bought or purchased at a very low price. And the requirement was that they had to leave. So now some live in municipalities that are close by, that are neighbors, Santa Rosa, San Juan, and others. And the remains that were exhumated by the company, because of the agreement with the government, they started to put a new cemetery. And so now family members have had to take the remains that they've found to other cemeteries, but also there are other remains that they have not been able to identify. And this business has many years, and there's a case that has been presented by the community. We've put a lot of demands and a lot of challenges to the corporations. But this particular case did not move forward because of the laws in Honduras make what the companies are doing illegal. And so they continue to work and operate. They continue destroying our forests. This mine is very intense. It's very large and it's destroyed the cemetery. It's destroyed water sources. And there are photos of this so that you can see the dimension and the scale of this issue.
How has the lack of access to clean water impacted women specifically in your community?
Uy, terrible.
It's been terrible because women, we're the ones, are the stewards. We give life and we take care of the fields. And as Indigenous women, we live in our mountains and in our land. And so now that the land has been conceded to hydroelectric dams and for consumption and also the development of coffee. So for women, we've been very impacted by these droughts because our rivers have dried. It's incredible to see how climate change has completely destroyed our lives and biodiversity. And so now we have to ration our water.
I remember that you mentioned that you cannot no longer wash clothes in the river because the water is like chocolate. And that detail just really stuck with me. And, you know, humans have had to migrate in your region to find new shelter. They're being displaced and dispossessed. But how is this also affecting the animal species? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
También.
Sí.
Yes. It's that water is life. Water is the center of our lives. And so our bodies are 80% water. Without water, we have no life. And not having water has created destruction. It's very hard to take care of our crops because of the lack of water. And also because the water has been conceded to these businesses and extractivism and the production of energy. So there have been many animals that have died off, and flora and fauna have also been affected. Climate change and our climate has changed completely. We have extreme heat, and that wasn't our reality before. Very extreme cold that we have never felt before in the last few years. And then you combine that with the pandemic that came to try and also kill us as well. And so we're very worried because as Indigenous peoples, we live in the most productive area for water. And now our waters are drying up. And so it's a very profound sadness that we're experiencing. So what can we really hope for our future generations? The impact is very heavy.
Margarita, thank you for sharing that harsh reality. We know that last month, the government under the new leadership issued a nationwide ban on all open pit mines, which automatically cancels multiple extractive permits. Has your community begun to feel the effects of this policy shift?
Bueno, fueron 12 años a partir
It had been 12 years with the coup that we had been under a very right-wing misogynist coup. And it was something that was very terrible. Those 12 years were incredibly hard. With Xiomara, our new president, the late decree that you mentioned is one of the things that her campaign talked about, is that the government would liberate and return our rivers, our mountains, our land, and that the concessions to all these companies would be annulled. And that was a big part of her campaign. And within her 30-point government program plan, there are 30 promises that she made that are very specific, and to use legislative power to start issuing decrees that would return our lands to us. Because Honduras, almost everything during the coup was sold for development zones that are called sedes, or charter cities. And that's supposedly supposed to bring us development through hydroelectric dams, wind farms, and also mining. Our forests are something that we've seen that the government under the coup had sold our forests to the European Union. And so this is something that we still have to talk about and discuss with the government, because we don't know what's going to happen with our forests. When you look at Latin America, there's been a lot of tree logging, and it's been sold to Europe and the European Union. And
Margarita,
also,
Margarita, may I ask, how is your organization MILPAH responding to these threats that are coming from many foreign companies and foreign entities? And what are your current demands?
Bueno, MILPAH nace a partir del golpe de Estado.
MILPAH started after the coup d'etat, and one of our struggles was making formal demands and working to protect our freedom and our access to land. And MILPAH starts in defense of land and land rights. And so we've done protests, marches, we've done communiques, we've done takeovers. It's been a very unequal struggle, because we've ended up being imprisoned, detained. We've had many, comrades who've had judicial cases against them. We've been declared usurpers on their own lands. And we could even see the cases of the people who've been liberated from their detainment in the North Coast. We've seen a lot more of these cases, and even people like land defenders who've been declared terrorists by the state. So we have the ILO Convention 169 that we turn to in Honduras, and it's current in Honduras, but the government hasn't applied the principles of ILO 169. So they always say that they have to do certain adjustments, but we fought as an organization for the ILO 169 because we have right to be informed. And with ILO 169, it's been one of our greatest tools to protect our land. And MILPAH, we continue to fight, even though we have a lot of conflicts and challenges, externally and even internally. We always believe that we must continue to fight. We're in a very large struggle.
We're going to wrap up for the final question, given the time. I'm sorry to interrupt. We know that the stakes are really high here, with Indigenous land defenders being murdered left and right. It's so tragic. This requires more attention. How do you continue this work, knowing that there's death threats against you? Where is your courage coming from?
Bueno, el valor es el compromiso que nosotros
The courage is the commitment that we make. For example, I've been the latest person to be given a death threat by the gangsters that work in the zone that I live in. They threatened me by telephone. They've dropped off letters at my house saying that I'll be killed. And this is because I've denounced the work that these companies are doing. And because I've been very clear and vocal. It's something that as the police told me when they started to surveil my house, they said, "What? You're already an older woman. You should just be quiet at home. What are you looking for?" But we know that this is a long struggle. And when we get into it, in my case, for example, after the comrade Humberto was assassinated by the hydroelectric company in 2011, and then on December 20th, 2020, our comrade Felix was assassinated when he was carrying some firewood. Some hitmen stopped him and killed him. We have other people who have been imprisoned and who are being pushed to sign agreements and under pressure are signed. In that condition, it's the commitment that we have.
Maria, we're going to
Right
go
now,
to...
MILPAH has 90 different councils at the local level. They trust us to represent them, and that's our commitment. We can't let them down. We can't abandon this struggle.
Thank you, Margarita, for sharing with us despite so much of a risk to you. We appreciate your life's work. We have questions from the journalists. The first one will be Maria Del Mar Oiz Oyaga. You can unmute yourself now. Maria, you can unmute yourself with your question. Okay, maybe we lost her. We'll go to the second question, which is from Mark Casanovas. You can unmute yourself now.
Hi, can you listen to me? Yeah, okay. If you don't mind, I can speak in Spanish, okay? Margarita, un placer escucharte. Estoy en
Margarita,
Barcelona.
it's a pleasure to hear you. I'm in Barcelona in Spain. I wanted to ask you, when you talk about they've stolen the mountains and the rivers from us, can you give me a little bit more of an example about how this affects our food? The fact that rivers and the landscape are being taken. What does this do to your daily life, to your food system? Of course, it's terrible because we're unable to produce food. We can't produce because we don't have water access. That's a clear impact because the water has been privatized. They don't have access to the river. There's a fence and a sign that says private property. So by making these dams, the companies use dynamite. Our aquifer got deeper and there's no surface level water as there used to be. So it's impossible for us to provide water for our animals, for our irrigation. So of course, this changes our lives. When they give our common goods to these foreign extractive companies, because they make commitments to the communities, but they never come through with these commitments. Did you hear me okay?
Yes,
thank you, Margarita. Thank you for this testimony.
Okay, so we have time for one final question. Okay, I don't see another question coming in. I just want to, oh, I'm sorry, Yvette, please unmute yourself. We'd love to hear your final question for Margarita.
Buenos días, señora Margarita. Yo soy Ivea Cabrera, trabajo para
morning.
aquí en los Estados Unidos. Soy reportera.
Margarita,
Quería preguntarle
I
si
work for Grist here in the
afectado la
United States. I'm a
tierra
reporter.
por la minería y si ha
I
afectado
wanted
a
to
la
ask you about
salud.
the contamination to the land based on mining and how that affects people's health. Again, it's terrible. In Tegucigalpa, there was a mine
Caso de 80
that
personas.
it was a very famous case of skin problems, the animals that died when they drank the water. In Santa Barbara, for example,
No hay oxígeno, entonces se
there's an environmental effect that's terrible because trees are cut down. There's a lack of oxygen in the air.
ya tenemos
There's a suffocating feeling in the air and people are getting sick. There's been international denouncements based on this damage by the mine and how it affects the population. But because our national government doesn't see any importance in this, the practices continue. Now we're hoping that Sayomara is able to carry out what she promised to us, and that's where we're at in this struggle right now.
Thank you so much, Margarita, for your time here today. We know that it's not easy and we appreciate your life's work again. We hope that we can continue to connect you to other members of the media, journalists, and digital storytellers. She has a lot more to share. It is time for us to wrap up. Thank you so much to all of the speakers, Tumal, Nathaniel, Matthew, and Margarita. We appreciate you immensely. Thank you to the interpreters. This is not an easy task, and we deeply appreciate your critical contribution today. And thank you to the audience for your presence. Please do engage with us if you would like to connect with any of the speakers, the interpreters, or if you want any additional resources on the stories that you heard today, feel free to reach out to A Growing Culture, and they're happy to make these introductions. Also, please share your articles and any published work, especially those that are related to what you heard today. You can email josh@agrowingculture.org. We'd love to try to circulate all the coverage collectively. And please do make sure that you're registered because these press forums will be happening every 3 months with the new round of voices, and all registrants will receive the attendance information and resources. Thank you so much, everybody.